let's get into Charlotte. Okay. Big Biff fired, canned. All right. He wasn't good. Okay. We can all admit that they missed on that hire. All right. Even though he did have some funny anecdotes and some press conferences and tweets, whatever, there was never a dull moment with Big Biff. But he just wasn't it. Right. And also the issue is too, like, you were barely having success in the CUSA alone. Right. And there is potential there. There's geography, right? There's, a want from the fan base to be better, right? Which means that you can do better, okay, than you are doing right now. But unfortunately, like, you went into this American Conference, you wedged yourself in there, by the way. Great work by the administration on that. We'll talk about the administration later and why Charlotte fans shouldn't be complaining like they are, but it needs to be better, right? So Big Biff is out. Who's in? Tim Albin, okay? We have talked about this guy relentlessly on this podcast here, okay? Tim Albin is an absolutely fantastic head coach, okay? He was over there at Ohio, and if you know anything about Ohio football, okay, you probably remember the last couple of years, you're like, dang, yeah, they are pretty good. They were a wagon. They were winning games. They were winning 10 games, 3 straight seasons with 10-plus wins. And not only that, you added a MAC Conference Championship game win, okay, the first in their program's history, right? The MAC championship game's been around since 1977. That is the first, okay, of their entire program's history. The only other teams in the MAC that hadn't won up until that point are Kent State and Eastern Michigan, right? 2 bottom feeders in that conference, okay? They lost 5 other conference championship appearances. This MAC championship, too, was a blowout. It was the largest margin of victory of any MAC championship game. They had the most first downs that they got offensively than any other team in MAC championship history, and then they also allowed the fewest yards and the fewest points of any team in a MAC championship game. This was a fantastic team. This was something that Tim Albin, a program he had built for, the last 4 or 5 years. He just won games with them, right? He just won games. In Ohio, right, in the MAC, we talk about teams that, don't necessarily have a lot of resources. I wouldn't put Ohio in that category, but they're not in the upper category, right? With the Miami Ohio's, the Toledo's, right? They're not in that big spender category. He just won games, okay? In Charlotte, okay, as much as you guys like to think you're big spenders, okay, you're not right now, okay? You are, I know, getting renovations on your stadium. That's a huge step, right? I know NIL is figuring itself out, okay? But the reality is you're not paying Tim Albin a lot of money. He's getting $900,000 to come to Charlotte, which is the second smallest contract. And actually, I'll say second, but we don't know what Scott Abel's getting at Rice. He could be getting more than $900,000. In that case,
probably not, but
probably not.
Close to that.
But if he is getting more than that, then that means that Tim Albin is the least paid head coach in the American Conference, right? So I guess if I was Mike Hill in this situation, okay, who just whiffed on your last 2 hires, right? Just whiffed bad. And I know fans are upset, okay? You go get a guy, okay, that wins with less. That is what Tim Albin has done. That's been his MO, okay? And I think this was a fantastic hire. Do you agree with me?
The fact that you can get him cheaper than you were paying Biff Poggi is crazy.
Unreal.
And now obviously, yeah, I can't believe it. And obviously, just because you get paid more to do a job, and we always talk about this, doesn't mean you're going to be better at that job. But the reality is like seeing that investment it just means you're not only investing in the head coach, but you're also investing in the assistant salary pool, in the recruiting budget, and other things that you need to have a thriving program. Speaking of a program for this football team, like this is a brand new program. And I guess if you aren't familiar with Charlotte football history, it's because there isn't really one, right? This is a program that was started. The first season was back in 2015, in the FBS. It was started, I believe, back in 2013. It was the first year they had football, and then they had a couple years in FCS, and then made their way up to the FBS because of the grace period that the NCAA requires. Regardless, though, they've been, obviously in the CUSA for a while, moved to the American a couple years ago. They have not had success in any year. Maybe one, right? When was that 2019, you went to the Bahamas Bowl, which for a program like Charlotte is like a big deal, right? Making a bowl game, obviously. And it should be. Like, making bowl games are awesome, and it's a huge reward to these fans and students and these coaches. But yeah, so you started this program pretty recently. You had Brad Lambert, right? Didn't really work out. You had Will Healy, who was there, who brought you to that bowl game in his first season, and then went slowly downhill from there and got really, really bad in 2022. And you had Biff Poggi, and he went 6-16 in his 2 years there, or maybe really 1.75 years there, right? And then obviously you go and you introduce Tim Albin after he goes, like you said, and wins the MAC. It's a big deal. Without a doubt, he gets an increase of about $400,000 to head over to Ohio, which, oh yeah, he's only making 900K. Doesn't seem like a ton for a head football coach. $400,000 is a lot of freaking money for Tim Albin, and obviously going to live in Charlotte, North Carolina is not a bad thing either. It's a beautiful place to live. Obviously, I think he also was sold on the potential and the opportunity to build a program like kind of in his own way. I'm sure not only did he get the $900,000, but I think a lot of it had to do with you know the investment that Charlotte's starting to put in their, revenue sports, right? With the construction of the stadium, like we talked about, going out and getting a guy like Tim Albin and giving him assistant salary pool, right? So he's going to be making $900,000 this year. Every year after that, he'll be making an additional 100,000. So it'll start making his way up to 1 million, then 1.1, 1.2, all that kind of stuff. And then, he also has a budget of $1.8 million for these assistant coaching pools, and then also other things, right, for support staff, any graduate assistants, and all that kind of stuff. And that's also with the fact that Charlotte has to buy out Albin's contract at Ohio, and then also, yeah. So it's not a jaw-dropping contract. It's not one that's like, whoa, where did this money come from Charlotte? But the reality is it's a good step in the direction, right? It's the opportunity to put yourself in a room to land a guy like Tim Albin, who's going to be able to, I think, absolutely elevate your program, because the reality is the expectation's not that high. And if he can make a bowl game, right, in the first couple of years he's there, like that's a great thing. That's a great thing for Charlotte. And we talked about this too, like being the American, yes, the Americans a much better conference than the USA, and it's a better conference than the MAC. But it's making a bowl game. There are a lot of bottom feeders in the American right now. Some of those programs are getting new coaches and might be getting better. Right, we talked about some of those schools. We talked about Rice. We talked about East Carolina. Right, and now we're in Charlotte. So if you have those three teams at the bottom, getting better coached, better run programs, it might be harder to just pick on some of those schools. But like we said, there's opportunity in the American without a doubt.
Yeah. The stadium renovations, you talked about them investing in their revenue sports. Okay. Uh, Mike Hill, I'm going to defend him. All right. Real quick, I'm going to defend him. I know Charlotte fans are pissed. I know Charlotte fans didn't want him to be the one who hires the next, football or basketball head coach for that matter after Ron Sanchez left. But Mike Hill, okay, he's not from the Scott Strickland tree like people believe. He was at Florida for 23 years before Scott Strickland even stepped foot on Florida, and that place started tanking. Okay, I know you're not happy because he hasn't been doing well in the revenue sports, but really that just takes investment. And then, like Charlotte fans are concerned, good hires. Okay, we believe here that Tim Albin's a good hire. Okay, don't trick yourself into believing that like some failed Power Five head coach, right? You could just hire like a big name, right? Like that, and then it's just gonna fix everything. That's not how it works. You need to build a program here. All right. Tim Albin is the guy to do that. And by the way, I know that you guys had really good basketball teams in the 90s, right? Early 2000s. And then even like, honestly, I thought Ron Sanchez, as much as fans would disagree with me, probably, I mean, you he won 22 games in the best year the CUSA has ever had in basketball in its history. FAU went to the Final Four. You had North Texas and UAB playing for the NIT championship, but then Charlotte won the CBI itself. You had a ridiculous conference, for talent there, and you won 22 games. By the way, more than Bill Lutz did in 90% of his seasons there when he was rolling in the 90s and 2000s. I know that you want more. And Ron Sanchez, by the way, is now the head coach of Virginia right there. I mean, who knows how long he'll be there for because it's not really working out great. But I'm just saying, I know you didn't want Mike Hill to make this hire, right? But if Tim Albin doesn't work out here, then I don't know what to tell you because this guy is going to be building a program with less. And the stadium renovations, like you said, they're investing more into this revenue sport thing. They are doing it because guess what? They have to. Okay.
You have to.
You had 15,000 people in your stadium that you can fit at capacity. Okay. That is half. I repeat, half of the number at the next smallest stadium in the American, right? And these renovations are good, $70 million. Okay, that's a lot of money. And by the end of it, when all of these renovations are done, you're still going to only be able to fit 21,000, which is again like a 67% of what some of these other stadiums are having. It'll be half of what Rice has in their stadium. Rice holds 47,000 in Rice Stadium, and I've been there. It's a block of concrete. It's nothing special. But it does depend how you build the stadium, right? If you build it up, right, it can get loud even with 21,000 people. The point is, I think Mike Hill is investing in these things, and you just have to stack hires, right? I think Tim Albin is a good hire. If this works out, I think Charlotte fans, I hope you will change your opinion about Mike Hill, because if you remember, there was a thought that he might be going to Tulane just a couple years ago. Right? People were looking at him for that job, because of what he was doing in the non-revenue sports, because of what he was doing trying to get investments right there. I mean, they have one of the smaller endowments, right, in all the American. Okay, despite their enrollment, I mean, you have an enrollment of 30,000, which is nice, which means the money is there. You just got to find it and go get it. And I think Mike Hill can do that. So I hope Charlotte fans don't get too pissed at me for defending Mike Hill, but I think he's a fine AD. I really do.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The only bad thing I will say, and it's not even bad, it's more mysterious, I will say about Tim Albin is he took over an Ohio program that, no, it was not winning MAC championships, but they were a successful program, right? Like if you could replicate what Frank Solich, who was the coach before Tim Albin, was doing before Frank Solich retired, was doing at Ohio, at Charlotte, you would take that 1,000%, right? His last 11 years there, and his last year was the COVID year, right? But then they didn't make a bowl game because they were 2-1, only played 3 games. Last 11 full seasons, they made a bowl game in 10 of them. That is crazy impressive. Now, the reality was it was a reset, right? When Frank Solich left, right, you bring in Tim Albin, promote him from OC, who had been there for a while, and he goes and they struggle in year one, right? 3-9, they reset. And then they win 3 straight seasons where they're winning 10, 10, and 11 wins. He absolutely elevated the ceiling of the program, took them to new heights than they had. But in terms of building a program up, right, he kind of was taking over a ship that was already moving in the right direction. Now, it doesn't take away from anything that he did. It's just going to be a little different of I think a year one, potentially year two, than he did see at Ohio compared to what he's taking in a brand new program like Charlotte. But the reality is he's an old guy. He's been around a while. He's 59. So we talk about sometimes where, especially in the G5, we have to acknowledge the reality of the situation in some of these conferences is that, like, there are better jobs out there than Charlotte. Like, that's not a shot to Charlotte. It's just the facts, right? So, like, if Tim Albin succeeds, and we hope he does, if you're a Charlotte fan, you hope he does, there is the chance that you see him plucked away for a bigger job, but he's also 59. And by the time he turns around the program in a couple years, he'll be 63, 64, right? How many of those guys we're seeing a little bit more, right? A little bit more with some of the older hires, at Houston and at Indiana, but those guys don't get hired a ton at the Power 4 level, right? To start coaching at 64, 65 years old. So maybe you have them for a little bit longer than you would typically with a successful coach, which is awesome too, right? And something to think about for sure. But yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, like we said, Tim Albin, what he did at Ohio, the opportunity to put yourself in the room to get a guy like him, you got to give Mike Hill a ton of credit for that and getting it done. I was shocked. I'll be honest. So they won the MAC championship, in that first weekend in December, right? And then the first Saturday in December. And then like the next day he's being announced at Charlotte, or maybe even later that night. And we're like, whoa.
Shocked.
I was like,
I was shocked.
first of all, and for those I'm going to be a Bobcat going to graduate school there. But that's like, it was disappointing for sure. But it's also like, an unbiased, like trying to do this from the national scope, being a college football, podcast or channel guy. I was like, that's a fucking great hire for Charlotte. Like at the first glance, like, let's go. And we have to address the elephant in the room here. And maybe maybe we're just thinking too hard and trying to find reasons to knock Tim Albin and just be unbiased about it. But we did talk about this a little bit off air, and I want to bring it up. He did not have a ton of players follow him, right, in the portal his way. And obviously there's 1,000 ways to think about that. And I, for one, am actually not too worried about it, but I do want to acknowledge it because I don't want to hide facts from you guys. You do see a lot of coaches, right, bring a lot of players, quarterbacks, guys like that with you on their way, especially if you're going to a rebuilding spot to try to kind of rejuvenize, bring your culture over, especially if you had success with those guys. And they didn't. And part of that, I think, was a testament to Ohio's culture there. They also promoted from within. That's a big deal because this new staff coming in for Ohio is not a new staff. It's a promotion for a lot of these guys. Now he's bringing over a couple position coaches that have worked with him at Ohio. So no surprise there, but it's just I think it's something interesting because you know you see him have so much success there, and then all of a sudden like no one's really leaving him. And maybe it was the way he left after they won a MAC championship, and then he left right away to go to Charlotte, and maybe ruffled some feathers there. And that's just the reality of the business that is college football today. So you can't really blame Albin or avoid that, with the way the schedule works out. But it's interesting. I want to hear your thoughts on that because I know you were pretty curious about that, beforehand.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit more concerned about that than you. And again, this is all speculation. So, like, really, it's not fair for us to be, knocking him for this, at all. But
It's just
he,
addressing the problem. Yeah, addressing
and
the
I'll
situation.
I'll let you talk about his staff in a little bit. But he did bring a decent amount of staff from Ohio, like a decent amount, right?
Mhm.
Like most on the defensive side of the football. And he did bring over two linebackers, right? Two of the linebackers, now they're like freshmen, sophomores, or whatever. They're two guys from Ohio that are coming to Charlotte in the transfer portal. And I don't know if it's because Tim Albin just told people, like, hey, if you go into the portal before playing this bowl game, then I'm not taking you,
Yeah.
right?
Which
It
they
could have
had
been one of those.
zero players in the we talked about that. And
Yep.
that was part of the reason why we were absolutely on Ohio. And they ended up actually pushing, but they won, but then pushing.
They should
But
not
yeah.
have pushed those. Should have covered. It was stupid. But anyways, uh, the point of me saying that is just like we don't know what the situation was or like why he's not taking players. It could be that he just like for some reason thinks that even though Ohio would have put in a spanking on Charlotte this year, probably I don't know. It could have been that he didn't think that they were ready, to move. Like maybe he didn't want to take certain players. I don't know what it was. Or again, like you said, maybe it's a credit to the culture that Brian Smith had established. It's clear that players love him, right? It's
Yeah.
clear that like he was a huge reason that they were that successful in those 3 years, right? That they won 10 games. Brian Smith was there for all of them, right?
Yeah.
So it could have been also uh, a result of the staff that Tim Albin hired there, and to their credit, that they're so good that them staying there, some of those guys on the offensive side of the football, it convinced a lot of people to still buy into that program for Ohio. Now, it is weird that you brought over your recruiting coordinator from Ohio, and you still didn't bring over a bunch of people. So I don't know. I thought that was funny. I thought it was weird. Maybe we look back on this in like 3 or 4 years and we're like, oh, that is interesting. But I have this higher graded, and we'll talk about it after you talk about your stuff. I have this graded as one of the highest graded hires that we've talked about so far.
Yeah,
For real.
like you said, it's not. I don't think it's a knock at all. I think it's more just something to address, and I thought we did a good job of that. Because like you said, it is speculation. Most of this video is not speculation. It's just like we're giving you a cold hard facts. Here's how we feel about it. Boom. That's like total speculation. It's not to knock anyone involved. It's just like a little bit interesting when you see in today's game where you don't see a mass exodus after a coach leaves, and it's like, well, is that why is that? Right? I think part of it too is, like you said, they all played in that bowl game. And I think that had a lot to do with team culture, which Tim Albin helped build, by the way. Right. So even if it was like not all his fault that they all played in the bowl game, it was that culture that he helped build, and was responsible for as the head coach of Ohio. And also, too, like I think humans are reactionary. 18 to 22-year-olds are reactionary, emotional kids, right? So like if your coach leaves, a lot of times you're just I'm just gonna jump at the portal because that's all I gotta do, right? Some agent's telling me I can make this amount. Parker Navarro can go here, or, the defensive lineman, Bradley Weaver can go here, whatever, right? So I think that part of that is maybe in some of that. But and then also too, like a couple weeks later, after it settles down, and you go to your bowl game, and you have a great bowl game, and you win, and you're reminded why you love Ohio and the university you're playing for, and then maybe you don't enter the portal, or as many of them enter the portal. So that I think it's just right. We just want to talk about it. Obviously, if you, yeah, we've said way too much about that. Let's get into the coaching staff. So Tim Albin is bringing. I thought he assembled a pretty solid staff here, and I'll get into the offensive right here.
I like it.
The
I like the staff.
Yeah, so the OC is going to be Todd Fitch. He's also going to be the assistant head coach and the quarterbacks coach. Interesting thing there is, so not that this really matters. Quick little anecdote is Tim Albin was the OC and the assistant head coach at Ohio before he took over. For that. So I think it's cool that he's keeping a little bit of continuity there as the assistant head coach. The OC he's bringing in is also the assistant head coach. He'll also be coaching QBs there. Fitch will. He was an offensive analyst for LSU, right, the past season, and we know what they did, right, with those guys after they lost a ton of production to the NFL and being able to kind of just plug and play a lot of players. And then Ohio State the past 3 years. So obviously there'll be a dramatic step down in talent, right, that he's working with, but we've also seen him connected to Mike Denbrock. Not Mike. Excuse me, not Mike Denbrock. The OC for LSU was Mike. Who? Am I tripping right now?
Mike Denbrock's at Notre Dame.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so Brian Kelly and the OC at
Talking
LSU.
about Joe Sloan.
Sloan, thank you. Yes, I'm sorry for that, viewers. And then also with Ryan Day, and Brian Hartline and guys like that at Ohio State. He has had play calling experience, though. He was the OC at Vanderbilt, Louisiana Tech, Boston College, USF, ECU, and UConn, and he had a ton of success most recently at Louisiana Tech, right? Part of the reason that got him over to Ohio State in 2019, they went 10-3, right? And then in the CUSA, and they put up 33 points per game. That's really freaking impressive, right? Sorry,
Yeah,
and
that's
then
probably why Sonny Cumbie, he was there, right? During that. Is that why he still probably has a job?
I think
Oh no,
so.
he was not at La Tech then. He was at Louisiana Tech.
Yes, yeah, sorry. And then the O-line coach will be Alan Rudolph. He worked for Albin at Ohio, so I love that continuity there. We talk about this in every video, every coaching staff. When you see an offensive coordinator, a head coach, an offensive line coach, I think that connection there is so, so valuable, right? To have those guys humming at the same part. Getting an offensive line right in year one is so hard. It is even harder to do when you are not familiar with each other. It doesn't mean it's going to work, but I think it's something that actually helps do it. The RB coach will be Brian Haynes. Now, remember, Albin has a ton of history coaching RBs, so we love this here. Brian Haynes is also, a special teams coordinator for him at Ohio. Most recently, he was at Appalachian State, right? The past 5 seasons there. He coached, Amani Marshall, Nate Noel, Kane Roberts, right? So he's got that connection to North Carolina. Also has that special teams coordinator title at App State as well. So he's familiar there. The tight end, Brian Metz, is going to be also coming over from Ohio. He was the recruiting coordinator there. So you brought up the fact that, some of those guys didn't leave with their recruiting coordinator or whatever. Brian Metz was that guy. The wide receiver coach, last of the offense, is going to be Paul Turner. Connection with Todd Finch there. He was an offensive analyst, the lead offensive analyst for LSU the past 2 seasons, right? Working with Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., Kyron Lacey, Chris Hilton, Aaron Anderson, et cetera, recruiting and developing those guys. He also coached and played at Louisiana Tech and LSU, so also part of that connection to Todd Fitch as well. So I love that continuity there. You got a couple guys from Ohio, and then you've also got Todd Fitch and Paul Turner, his guy. So yeah, like I said, it's a pretty solid staff. I think Tim Albin was able to put together, especially with the fact that they didn't have, a ton of money to go out and get assistant coaches. Like, 1.8 is a lot. It was significantly more than it was in the past season. But yeah.
Yeah, like you said, I like that offensive staff right there. We'll see, I guess, how it works. I mean, Tim Albin's got his ideas of how he wants an offense to look, so he'll obviously have his flavor of stuff in there. So we're gonna have to wait and see, I guess, to really see what the offense looks like. But if you know anything about Ohio football these last couple of years, they have had really good defenses. And I think that this staff is reflective of how highly he thought of his defense at Ohio.
Yeah, absolutely. And real quick, going back to the offense there, he also did have some very good quarterback play, right? So Curtis Rourke, if you remember him from the college football playoffs, and then Parker Navarro is probably the best quarterback in the MAC, right? Especially at the end of the year, the way he was playing.
Yeah, I'd
And
agree with
then
that.
so we'll see how, with Connor Harrell and Grayson Loftus, how those guys work out. A couple of transfers he's bringing in. I do trust Tim Albin and his staff and his ability to put together a quarterback and an offensive. But you talked about the defense. Let's get into it here. So the DC will be Nate Fans. He has been Ohio's co-defensive coordinator, special teams coach, and linebacker coach before. He's also going to be coaching the LB unit for the interesting thing about him, and I love this. I love cross training in my coaches, especially when you have, that other side of the ball, especially at a younger or lower level of football too. I think that's awesome. So he was on the offense side of the ball at D3 Wisconsin Eau Claire. He also served at his alma mater, Winona State in Minnesota. He spent 9 seasons at Ohio with Tim Albin. So obviously a lot of connection, a lot of familiarity there. Like you said, their defense was one of the best in the country. Most recently, they were top 10 in total defense. They were number 3 in rushing yards. They averaged 90 yards per game on the ground, giving up. That is really freaking good. Only 6 programs were under 100. We'll see if that translates. Obviously, I don't expect that kind of success early on, but damn, that's damn near very impressive. The D-line coach will be Kurt Maddox. He will also be the co-defense coordinator, just a title, right? So Nate Fans will be calling plays. Uh, like you said, like I mentioned Bradley Weaver earlier, he was a stud for Ohio. Kurt Maddox obviously, helped develop him into a first-team All-MAC guy. He also has experience as a defense coordinator, right? So I think that helps with Fans. He was the DC of South San Diego State. The defensive tackle coach is going to be David Denham. So he did not work at Ohio, but he worked against Ohio and Tim Albin at the MAC. He was the D-line coach at Western Michigan. And if you are an NFL draft fan in 2024, and first of all, subscribe to us because we'll be talking about the draft in a little bit. But the defensive line for Western Michigan had a field day, right? So you had Braden Fisk, you had Marshawn Nealon, a couple guys that were, previous Bronco alums that pretty damn impressive, right? So that's obviously a fun hire for Albin. Safeties coach is going to be Brian Nardo. Okay, he was the defense coordinator at Oklahoma State, and this was one of the worst defenses, if not the worst defense in all of college football this past season. They were actually pretty damn good in 2023, right? They made it to the Big 12 championship game. Before that, he was the DC at Gannon University. I remember that was a big talking point when they hired him.
I mean, he was good with Jim Knowles' players.
Yes, and so obviously he's significant step down going from Big 12 defense coordinator down to, your position coach, right, for Charlotte. And not to discredit him at all, but that's the reality. After you have a season like that, like you're not going to be a hot commodity in coaching staff. I do like the fact that you have a lot of guys who have experience calling plays for him on that side of the football. And then the cornerbacks coach will be Trey Bell. Most recently was at West Virginia as a defensive analyst, obviously working with that secondary most often. He was also a GA at Florida State and Mississippi State, and he played at Vanderbilt and UConn in college. So that's the defense side of the ball, and obviously you talked about it earlier. This is Ohio Part 2, right? You're bringing over a lot of guys from that staff, and if you are a Charlotte, I almost said Bobcat. If you are a Charlotte fan, right, the 49ers, I think you could be pretty happy about the staff that Tim Albin was able to assemble in year one, and the fact that he's able to bring over some very qualified, very successful guys from his tenure at Auburn or at Ohio. Excuse me.
Yeah, we'll see how it works out, right? I like continuity, right? I like experience. On paper, this seems like a good staff. We'll wait and see how they'll gel, right? Overall, okay, as a grade, okay, we talk about this. Okay, B, right, is like, hey, this coach is going to meet expectations. An A, they're going to exceed expectations. A C, they're not going to meet expectations likely. And the thing is, too, like a coach could get fired and like totally meet expectations. So, like, if we give a coach a B and they end up getting fired, and still met expectations, then it's like, yeah, well, it's a good grade, you know. For this though, I think this is a fantastic hire. I think he will. The expectations for Charlotte, I guess, are to make bowl games. You know,
Not
like
every year, but like
not every year,
1 out of every 3 years, right?
but
2 out
boy,
of every 5.
do I think he can do that and more? Absolutely. I'm going to give this hire an A minus. I think Tim Albin is a spectacular coach. I don't know that he's going to be at Charlotte forever because, I mean, of his success, he's 59. So if he's there for 5 years and he does really well, I could see him, you know, trying to catapult himself into like an elite job. I think he's a dang good coach, man. And I do think that the investments into the program are going to keep him around a little bit longer. He did probably stay at Ohio a little bit longer than I thought he would, right? But this is a good coach. I give it an A minus, and that's like probably the third highest grade that I've given any coach. So, boom, great hire.
Yeah, I'm right there with you with A minus. Obviously, the expectation is pretty low, I think, for Charlotte. But I think it's not. I think he can absolutely meet that, and he will exceed it. Right? That's something that's obviously the goal is to leave something better than you found it. Right? If you're Tim Albin, if you do end up leaving at some point, right? Like bringing them into what Ohio was every freaking year, right? It's found like past decade and a half where they are going to bowl games. That is awesome. Helps you, be able to fundraise for this new stadium. Helps you be able to fill your stadium when they do have that in conference play. I look at the coaches around the American and I see four, right? I see Jeff Monken, Ryan Silverfield, John Summerall, and probably Jeff Traylor or Eric Morris, maybe one, if not both, of guys that like I know are probably better, if not for sure better than Tim Albin. Everyone else, I think, and we'll see how it works out. Obviously, it's going to be a change going to the American, going to a new school, all that kind of stuff. But you want to talk about like if you could just redraft coaches, right, in the American, like I think he's going in that upper half. And that's freaking awesome. First of all, you're getting him at a discount, right? And you also have a spot where, you have a chance to really, raise the floor of your program, which I think is what Tim Albin will do for the 49ers here.